up? What's up? Let's go. Let's go. DJ's cruising on a cold, wet Saturday morning. How are you all? We're doing great. That was Rooks G with the classic Higher Life Forms. Shouts out to Rooks G right there. Hey, let's get it popping. Let's go right away here. We're going to get it started. And, yo, what's up? So tonight we're covering The Brutalist, the movie by Brady Corbet that came out this past year. And this movie was nominated for Best Picture, and along with a bunch of other films were nominated. It had a bunch of other nominations, and including Best Cinematography. And this movie did win Best Actor because Adrien Brody gave a 33,000 hour long speech. This was his second win, of course. And this film, well, we'll get into the film in a second, but the Oscars this year were wild. Not that that's our starting point for this, but this was the first year where I wasn't able to predict who should have won and who would win with 100% accuracy, because I've been able to do that over the years. That's my only talent. It's my only skill. And so anyway, Adrien Brody won, and I did not expect him to win. But we're going to talk about The Brutalist, and I've watched this movie so you don't have to. It's 3 hours and 40 minutes, and it includes, of course, an intermission. It's got an overture, and it has an epilogue in it. The epilogue, I'm going to get to the dynamics and the mechanics of the film, but tonight we're going to talk about brutalist architecture, especially versus the context I put this in is, of course, mid-20th century architecture. We're going to talk about Bauhaus, brutalism, and then also the New Germania. We're going to discuss H1tler architecture, and I hate having to say that, but we got to be careful. But we're going to discuss Berlin and, of course, European architecture in the mid-20th century. And, that's not our specialty here. We talk about books and movies, but I've got a giant stack of reading material that I did for this, including this book right here, which is H1tler and the Power of Aesthetics by Frederick Spotts, which I included in the video description. If you want to read the video description, that includes a thesis for this stream right here. And the title of this stream is Belligerent Victimhood because, we're going to get into, I think, some of the motifs and themes of this movie and what it really did, and I think what the movie accomplished and what it didn't accomplish, and that falls in line with the aesthetics of course, brutalism. I'll say that I was looking forward to the movie. I was really when I go into movies genuinely and with pretty open mind. I'm pretty diplomatic as far as movies go, and I was. This film is kind of what I expected, but in other ways, it was not. And what I mean by that is that, hold on, I hate doing this on here because it's okay. There we go. Because really, I think that the film did stack its grievances, and what I mean by that is that it included just about every possible victim point that you could include in the movie. I mean, it includes, of course, it's got heroin addiction, adultery, robbery, grape, a horrible grape soda thing happening with it, capitalism, communism, H-cost, memories of summer camps. And with all that being said, in a 3 hour and 40 minute long movie, there really wasn't that much for me to take away in terms of, for us, for a viewing audience. I think for us to to glean from the characters, which is really amazing because maybe I'm still trying to figure out. I think that might be one of the brilliant points of the movie, meaning that obviously when we look at architectural styles, and we've talked about the house as a symbol in terms of literature and film many times, and for instance, one of the examples that I've used is in Wuthering Heights. When we discussed Wuthering Heights, there's a scene where Catherine is in the window, and the ghost of Catherine appears to Heathcliff in the window, and the forlorn, windswept house on the moors in Wuthering Heights serves as an outer representation of the inner lives of the characters, especially their spiritual lives. So when you look at characters who are looking out a window, a lot of times in literature and in film, especially in literature, when you're looking out a window, it means that they're experiencing a new worldview, or they're looking out, their psyche is reflecting outwards, or they're looking into a new experience. There can be a whole number of things that happen. But when a character is looking in, for instance, when they see the reflection in the window, they're seeing not only a reflection of themselves, but they're seeing a reflection of their inner selves, their inner life. When they see both themselves in the reflection and the outside, if they're looking from inside out, then we're placing their inner life in the exterior. And of course, if a character breaks a mirror or breaks a window, then that often serves as some sort of fracturing of the psyche. Well, if we expand that into architecture, then when we look at building on a massive scale, even if it's just one particular project, then the building itself, the architecture of the building, has to serve as some sort of allegory or some exterior symbol for the life of either a people or a community or a nation, or even just a particular architect who designed it. There are also a number of other things with this. I'm going to kind of avoid the what would be an obvious symbolic interpretation of the film in terms of its Masonic implications, just because it's architecture and the architect, that it seems to be, that is going to play into anything that deals with that. We're going to kind of avoid that one because that's a whole other stream, and that's probably too much to include with this. So if somebody else goes into that, or if we go into that later, that's fine. But that's sort of outside the purview of this one because it's just too much. There's a lot to discuss in terms of the movie. We have, by the way, discussed art before in terms of the visual arts. If you're new here, or if you want to go back and watch my stream on The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, we discussed, first of all, art in the book and what art means in the book, especially with Victorian, Edwardian, and modern art. And we also went into the Surrealist Manifesto by André Breton and a bunch of surrealist works. So we've also discussed it on Malaforta recently. We discussed Blakean engraving and romantic art. So we're going to try to find our way into this. And I'll say this. So let's start off with this, just basically for the audience here, which you guys probably already know all this stuff. I know everybody here's super aware, hyper IQ, and super based. But we're going to talk about, let's give some basics, just for your sake, about what is brutalism. Well, I'm going to cover the essay. There's a famous essay called "The New Brutalism" by Raynor Banham here, and brutalism really can. The term brutalism was first coined by some Swedes, but we also get it from Le Corbusier. The architect Le Corbusier. Le Corbusier is the guy who was building a structure, and he had it full on concrete, and there were marks left in the concrete that left it rough. And this was at the end of the project. I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but at the end in sort of a fit of disillusionment, he proclaimed "Beton Brut," which means keep it brut, keep it brut, which means rough, keep it concrete. Also, one thing that sort of make, I think, a good differentiation just on a more basic level than that is what's the difference between cement and concrete? As far as I know, and I'm just some guy eating fuchsia crayons dribbling down my chin. I'm just some slow boy. But as far as I know, the terms become interchangeable. But as far as I know, cement is the wet base material, and when it hardens into the structure, it becomes concrete. Correct me if I'm wrong. If you're an architect or you're a builder, and we got a lot of people who are in the Chad labor field out there who watch, so I know people will know this. I don't know if there's any architects watching, but you guys know this. I'm just a guy who reads books, and barely that. I can barely read. So that's where it comes from, Le Corbusier. He's also the guy who he was the head of the Bauhaus school, and he also was the guy who, remember when they were replanning Paris around the mid-20th century, and he is the architect who his solution to planning Paris was to demolish everything, raze it to the ground, and rebuild it in essentially a modernist style, which became a kind of brutalist style, which in the what looks to me, in my interpretation, would be kind of like if you've ever driven through New York City, if you're entering New York City or you're leaving, especially if you're going towards Brooklyn or towards Queens, you'll notice, a place like, for instance, Bed-Stuy. If you look at Bedford-Stuyvesant, if you look at Bed-Stuy, and you look at tower blocks, those look like what Corbusier wanted. And in fact, one of the things with brutalist architecture, one of the major drawbacks, and people were even in the 20th century when these buildings were being planned, the public had a strong reaction to them because of their ugliness, and this is part of the point. This is the sort of anti-aesthetics of ugliness, or aesthetic terrorism, as we've kind of come to call this sort of thing. Now, we have to look at architectural movements and styles and art in the same way that we look at literature, in a way, because all these things are tied together. H1tler and many others have put out there that architecture is the highest art form. I disagree with this. I personally think that classical opera is the highest art form because it contains all of the other highest art forms. It contains poetry with the libretto, classical music, especially if it's Mozart or anything coming from Bach. Mozart and Wagner are the kind of twin pillars of classical opera. At drama school, I had one of my teachers there said that the best works are a kind of synthesis between Mozart and Wagner. You have Wagner is the heavy bass, the heavy low end, and Mozart is the high end. And if you think about this in terms of drinks, this is what he said, that if you think about two different kinds of drinks, then Wagner is Guinness and Mozart is champagne. And I sort of think about those in terms of the ring cycle or the magic flute, of course, Don Giovanni. But anyway, DJ, Art Vandelay definitely agrees with that statement. You are correct, sir. And Art Vandelay is one of the greatest architects of the 20th century. He had a career in latex before that, and of course in the import-export business. But opera to me is of course a lost art mainly, but the classic, really the neoclassical works of opera, which is where opera really came from, still stand as sort of the highest arts for me, because architecture is contained in stage design. And they contain all of those things. But architecture itself is something unique because it is less interpretive, like literature. It's less ethereal. It's more concrete in terms of its essential nature. And it is also subject to the whims of the people who can afford it. And that's one of the points of this film, because Laszlo Morphine, who is the protagonist I'm going to call him Laszlo Morphine because that's Roger's name in American Dad, and that's basically what he does in the movie. Laszlo Toth, or Laszlo Morphine, wants to build. He is tasked with building this gigantic complex for this uber capitalist titan played by Guy Pearce in the film. But one of the points of the movie is that his original design is sort of degraded or messed with constantly. And this, as I was saying at the beginning, stands for the degradation, or what he sees is the degradation of his character and of his people. But there's some nuance to that. And this is why I would call the entire thing a belligerent victimhood. It's also, I never take notes on movies. As you know, I annotate books, so I don't really take lists of notes on books when we cover them here. But I did write down some afterthoughts from the film because I think this film called for it. There's a lot into it. So the movie also has a kind of postmodern dissonance. One of the things I'm going to discuss is the score of the movie, the soundtrack, which is a dissonant jazz, which plays into the film, but is also juxtaposed against the action in the film. It serves to reinforce what's happening on the scene in the various scenes of the movie, but it adds this element of chaos. There's a certain amount of chaos, which I think, again, may be one of the brilliant things about the movie. One of the good things about the movie by Brady Corbet. Brady Corbet is in the film. He's in a scene in the beginning of the film when they arrive at Ellis Island. There's, of course, the proverbial Ellis Island scene where they're changing their names. My name is Laszlo Morphine. Your name's Larry Miller? Okay, fella, go on ahead. I love how they just change people's names like that. It's awesome. We're going to give you an American name. Fuck. Excuse my language. But he's in the Ellis Island scene. Brady Corbet, I've talked about this before. There's a movie that I have discussed, which is I've only watched this movie once. I will never rewatch it again, and it's called Funny Games. It's Michael Pitt and Brady Corbet, and they play Gemini twins, kind of Castor and Pollux, who do a home invasion on Naomi Watts and I think Tim Roth. And I think the soundtrack's by Warren. It's like Warren Zevon or John Zorn, or so there's a Z name in there. But it is one of the most disturbing movies I've ever seen, and I won't rewatch it. But Brady Corbett's in that. But he actually did this movie, and one of the things that he said about the film is that nothing in the original plans for the movie was changed in terms of the final production, in terms of how it appears on the screen. Now, that may be the case, and that is certainly in line with a kind of futurism. Later on, it really turns into a kind of Beat Generation, or a first thought, best thought, romantic poetry era into the Beat Generation type of literary ideal for the movie. But the problem with that is that it's almost certainly not true, and it's never true in terms of literature. That's almost never true. So, for instance, my my sort of justification for that is that's true in terms of thought. It's true in terms of intention, but it's not true in terms of the actual artistic product. So, for instance, Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Kubla Khan, where he was in the middle of a laudanum opiated dream vision, and the person from Porlock, as he says in the introduction, or in the prologue to the lyric poem, interrupted him in the middle of this vision and writing this poem, this epic poem, Kubla Khan, interrupted him, and he was unable to finish when he got back to the business of writing. That doesn't mean that was the first thing that he thought, and he wrote the whole thing down perfectly. There are very few artists in the world who I think could ever do that, and it's not necessarily a virtue in itself. Mozart is probably the only person I've ever heard of who could do that, but he was still editing and revising in his head. But there's still, if you look at facsimiles of his work, there's still notations on there and corrections, even if it's just, if he's just making mistakes in terms of the transcription from the head down to the pen. So in terms of building, you're at the whims of the person who funds the project. And just like a filmmaker is at the whim of, in this case, A24, of course, this director from London. That's the problem, these directors from London. No, this guy, of course it's an A24 movie. It's got that all written all over. We've covered a lot of A24 movies. I actually don't have a problem with, I think the political sentiments are, we all know what that is. But the films do have a certain je ne sais quoi, a certain jouissance. No, they can be fun. Like I covered that movie, I saw the TV Glow, which has, it has whatever. But visually, I like a lot of elements of that, and we've covered a bunch of their films. And this movie visually, of course, is pretty stunning. It's a 35 millimeter, 70 millimeter, whatever, shown in 35 millimeter of reverse. It's VistaVision, and it really is huge in scope. And I really like that they did that, because to show some of the landscapes, especially the hilltop scene and then the buildings themselves, you have to have a gigantic presentation on the screen. It can't just be and I don't look. We trained actors. I trained as an actor at drama school. I don't know anything about lighting or techie stuff or production. All I know is acting in terms of the production of theater or film or television. But we can talk about it analytically, because we're not producing things. We're talking about them analytically here. We're analyzing them. So when you look at the screen, though, you can't have the same screen in a small sense that you would have when you're looking at a hulking building that is dominating a landscape. And so it is pretty cool that it was a film that explored that. And the length of the film also doesn't bother me. That's one of the main drawbacks, I think, of a lot of people when they analyze a film or they discuss a film, is the length, and that can be tedious. There's certainly a lot that could have been excised from this, that could have been cut. But when we look at a giant cinemascape and we think of the length and brevity and depth of a film, form and content, form plus content equals meaning. Just like Corbusier and these people said that form follows function with building. So, if we're going to have these giant structures, it makes sense that we would have something gigantic on the screen. And it is clear, it is crisp. There is one problem in the film, and that is, and again, I think I can't tell if this is something that is subtly intentional and brilliant, but I've talked before about how in films, and I know you guys can understand this. I can often tell when we have a location film, a film that's made on location, which is set in America, but it's filmed on location outside of America. And it's the same thing with how they used to make films about Belfast that were filmed in Dublin. There are subtle differences, and there are major differences. And it always bothers me because, and it's something that's, I think it's kind of hard to tack down in terms of verbiage, but one thing is that if a movie is made in Virginia, for example, I can tell right away that it's made here, because the leaves, Virginia is full of trees. There are so many trees here, and the trees here are different than the trees in the Pacific Northwest. There are a lot of oak trees here, a lot of dogwoods, and a lot of deciduous trees, and it gives a certain texture, especially, for instance, when it's going to rain or in slight seasonal changes. But the way that the landscape looks, and the way that it's almost the way that the air looks, is different than if it's filmed in, for instance, upstate New York. They just look different. It's not even with buildings, it's just with nature. But when you involve buildings, one thing that's ironic for all this stuff is that part of the brutalist ethos is the construction of buildings that will last forever. And this takes us into Ozymandias territory from Percy Shelley that we've covered, which is the hubris of man to build things that last forever. They don't. But the irony is that they are building buildings that are supposed to withstand time and the, what does he say in the movie? The what's the quote that he says? I forget the quote that he says. The slight fluctuations in political sentiment, or something like that, on the shores of the Danube. But when we're looking at them on film, especially when they're taking place almost a century after the events of the film, we notice that you can change things, but you can't change the buildings. And especially with the interiors, there are huge differences between, for instance, European architecture and European interiors from American interiors. So all that being said, the movie is supposed to take place mainly in Pennsylvania. And it was actually filmed in Hungary. And when we were watching the film, when we see a lot of the interiors of Guy Pearce's house, like it's notable. There's something to be remarked on. There's a lot of weirdly stained wood in the interiors, and there's a resonance in the sound where you can hear the floorboards creaking, and it's got this kind of like Rococo style spindrical like banister thing that's in the backdrop of a lot of these shots. It's the same sort of thing that you see on a bedpost of like a Renaissance bed. And I know this isn't so subtle that just I'm seeing it. I think it's you guys would notice this if you saw it. Okay, let me break it down like this. Have you ever been in the house of a very wealthy person? Okay. If you look at pictures, like you take an aristocrat in England, or you've been to a preserved museum from somebody in America, or you've been to a plantation house or something. A lot of these houses, the difference between the plantation house that's been preserved and the early 20th century mansion is really in the sound. And the sound in the interior of the house indicates there's a kind of fullness. So, for instance, like you guys saw in the news that John Tyler's grandson just died. John Tyler was the 10th president, and he's a plantation house down the way here, not far from here. And his grandson just died. He was the 10th president. His grandson just died at age 96, which is the remarkable thing about this. He was tennis buddies with my uncle. And if you go to Shirley Plantation or Berkeley Plantation or any of these places, and you walk inside, the floorboards are thick, and you can hear sort of everything creaking. That's part of what later became, the colonial style, the Federalist style, and there's all these buildings, these big plantation houses that they didn't have. It's not like they were lacking anything, but the style of it, they were lacking all of the fullness of products and stuff that came along in the 19th century, and then especially were filled houses in the Belle Epoque or in the fin de siècle in, for instance, New York. When you go into an aristocrat's house, you'll notice, there are Oriental rugs, there's Persian carpets, there are paintings, there are tapestries, there are statues and busts, and there are all sorts of, that's why Sherwood Forest, there are all sorts of things around that sort of absorb the sound. And that's especially true. Go to the Biltmore Mansion. If you go to the Biltmore Mansion, don't go down to the pools. Oh, boy. I'm not even going to get into that one. But if you go to the Biltmore, you'll notice this. This is a prime example of this. There's a kind of fullness. But when you go into Guy Pearce's house in the film, I'm saying go into because we're taken into the interior of the house. It's like you hear a kind of openness in the sound. And the whole time, every time they showed this house, I kept thinking, this isn't accurate. It's not, maybe it's true, but it's not real. So in other words, maybe the point, the Brady Corbet, maybe this is a subtle, brilliant point in the film. Maybe he was showing that for all of the exterior wealth of this Titan, and for all the things that he supposedly possesses in the movie, and for all of his land and his outfits and all in his family, all the stuff that they have, when you go into his house, it seems empty. And maybe that's supposed to symbolize the emptiness of his character. I think that is probably a happy accident, as they say, something that comes out of I'm not sure if that was intentional. It doesn't really matter. But it also is sort of disingenuous because even the emptiest of these Titans have full houses full of stuff. And the movie didn't have. And part of that, I think, is that it was filmed in Hungary. And I'm not sure that. I just think there's a disconnect in there. That's probably that might be sparking out about that one point in the movie. But the reason I'm going on about it is because they continuously show this guy's house. They continuously take us inside in the location. And it would be one thing if we were in his house one time, but we're in it continuously throughout the movie. I was really surprised when they showed the scene where Adrian Brody goes in and he's talking to Guy Pearce and he wakes up from his hangover and he's got his smoking jacket on and he's kind of coming to. It's like he has all of the accoutrement of wealth, his clothes, he's wearing a tie at breakfast. He's got the paintings in the background. He's got servants, but there's just something missing where it was like they didn't get the location right. It was disconcerting in the movie, I think. But again, maybe that was the point. Maybe that was sort of a foreshadowing or a mirror of what brutalism became. So here's what let's get into the movie. Castles, Banner says castles must be a biatch to heat in the wintertime. Well, they were. Castles are known as for being, of course, drafty, damp and drafty. But that's one of the reasons why they were full of fabric. That's why they have tapestries lining the walls, and of course, gigantic hearths. And I think castles, with all that being said, castles have an extreme coziness to them because of the warmth of the number of people in the castle. Because I'm not trying to get sidetracked here, but one of the points that we see continuously, especially in Shakespeare, is that's the whole driving force of the murder that occurs at the beginning of Macbeth. When Macbeth has his soliloquy about whether he should kill Duncan or not. One of the points is that he is inviting, Duncan sort of invites himself to Glamis. And when we get to the castle, we see in the production, and we see this in our imagination, it's in the language, that one of the things that the king would do is, in the feudal system, of course, is that we have various lords and we have all the surrounding property where people can come into the castle if they need to be protected inside of the keep. But we also have a continuous system of coming and going with the different levels in the hierarchy. So the house is never empty. The castle is never empty. It's almost always full of people, and the families are so big. That's the whole point of the royal court. And that's actually relevant for this because that lasts into the 20th century. If you've ever seen, of course, Gosford Park or Downton Abbey, I mean, those are prime examples of that. That's the holdover from the feudal era. But what happens in the film? So the movie is about a character named Laszlo Morphine who is waking up on a bunk in the bowels of what we realize is a ship. And he is making his way through these shadowy people from the bowels of the ship up to the deck because they are about to enter America. And we really get to him at the end of his voyage from the old world into the new. And there is a great shot of an inverted Statue of Liberty that eventually turns sideways and uprights itself. And it is pretty amazing. I mean, I know all the stuff about the Statue of Liberty. I know it's Lucifer standing up there holding up the light of illumination, illuminate, confirm, and all this stuff. I know all that, but it is a pretty soaring scene, just cinematically. And so we know that this character, we don't know him yet in the movie. We know that he's coming to America, and we don't know who he is. We don't know anything about him, but he gets here, and two of the coolest characters kind of are at the beginning of the movie, and they disappear. One of whom is like a kind of a Che Guevara looking guy with a beret on, who's guiding him through the streets, and he's in Manhattan. And I kind of wish that the movie had been about that guy. He looked cooler. Belly says, honorary. Yeah. Well, actually, that is one of the things that actually plays a plot point in the movie, because they play on Adrian Brody's actual face as being a symbol of his broken history, because they can see that he's been through some shit. He's seen some things, man, and some stuff. And so the capitalist titan offers to fix his nose as part of this, because he's got a broken face, a broken nose. So it's kind of a meta thing in the movie. But he hooks up with what's the character's name? He's the guy who plays Pollux in Face Off. And he's in that movie, The Art of Self-Defense. I really like this actor, actually. And he basically plays Adrian Brody's cousin. And he's already made his way to America, and he's got a furniture shop in and he's in Pennsylvania. So when they go from New York, first they're in New York. And by the way, the first thing he does when he gets off the boat is ends up at a brothel. And it's just you guys will hate this movie. You just will. Everybody that I've talked to, that's in our world, I've just said, the first thing I've said is, you guys will hate this movie. I've got an aquiline nose. My nose has been broken two or three times. I broke it. It's crooked. It's crooked, and it's got all kinds of problems. And I broke it 3 years ago walking through a dark auditorium. I walked straight into a steel light. It was holding the Klieg lights for the stage, and I walked straight into it and broke it right there. Also, broke it in a fight, but you should have seen the other dude, huh? You should have fucking seen the other dude. That was 20 years ago, but anyway, so no, seriously though, you should have seen the other dude. So anyway, but I'm not advocating that, because we are for peace. Piece of pie. Hey, you want a piece of pie? Okay. So anyway, no, Adam Driver's dad is a Baptist minister. Is he Baptist? He's a Baptist minister. Just like Don Simpson. Everybody thinks that about Don Simpson. Don Simpson was also Baptist. Anyway, so yeah, the first place he ends up is in this gross brothel, and it's a pretty. It's like, okay, here we go. I am a cowboy looking for anything heavy. That's right, Jethro. Tell him Wayne grows here. So then also, by the way, I don't know how I knew this, but I knew this dude was going to be I knew he was going to be into that dog food. I knew he was going to be into that Mr. Brownstone when I watched the movie. I don't know how I knew that before I even read a review of the movie. I just knew it. And I was right. So he goes searching for that horse, that Laszlo. And anyway, then he goes down to Pennsylvania and he gets a job with his cousin who owns the furniture store. Now, the furniture store is going to be a representation cinematically of the history of Bauhaus and Brutalism, because it sort of all begins with a chair. And we have the redesigning of the interior elements of a house in a style worthy of futurism and minimalism, which kind of indicate the beginnings of the modern era in a physical sense. And, Ezra Pound, we've done streams on Ezra Pound. We just did the Wasteland stream. Ezra Pound really talks about this. Ezra Pound was one of my favorite quote from Ezra Pound is, "The only artist today living of note is Gaudier Breshka." So Gaudier Breshka and Arno Brecker. Arno Brecker, you guys have seen all the memes, I'm sure, on Insta. If you're in my algorithm, which I'm not even going to say what it is on Instagram, but it's a whole lot of H1tler. Okay, and if you've seen the memes of the Nordic looking statue fella, that is Arno Brecker. That Arno Brecker is the guy who did a lot of the H1tlerian era statues, and that's going to play into a later part of the stream. But anyway, so where was I? So he gets a job at this furniture store, and with his cousin who's made his way over with his wife, and the first thing he does is redesign some of the furniture. The furniture is really pretty basic looking, kind of nondescript, but it's wooden, it's handmade, and he's going to design. He designs a chair, and that's the beginning of his arc as a architect in the New World. Now we're going to learn that Laszlo was a notable architect in the Old World before the camps recruited him, took him, or whatever. But that's the secret impetus for the whole movie, and I'm going to get to that part. So then they get a contract from this young fella who is a Chad. This rich Chad walks in and he's like, "Hey, you want to design some?" I muted it. Don't worry. Are gonna design a thing for my dad. Listen, my dad's a real fancy rich guy. All right, and he's got a library, but he doesn't know how to read. So they go to this guy's mansion, and that's Guy Pearce. We haven't seen Guy Pearce yet. They go to this mansion, and basically they walk in through the fancy house, and they go into the library. And the library shit, it's all first editions, but it's not like the Ninth Gate, where there's first editions everywhere. And, Melly, you got I don't know how you get a crown, but you got a crown? Somebody give her a crown. I don't know. And so they go in and there's first editions everywhere, but it's a real dusty ass looking place, but without the character of an old library where people actually read the books. That's the difference between Ninth Gate and this. Even though they're reading, all kinds of raunchy, satanic stuff or whatever in that movie, they are libraries. And remember in Ninth Gate when he goes into the second guy's house and the guy has all the books on the ground and he's in the other room playing the violin? That's not what this is. This is a dusty ass looking place with, some red drapes or whatever. So they decide to redesign it, and Laszlo designs this place. They've got this Tiffany, look, it's kind of a rusty looking Tiffany window atop the whole library, and they got to get rid of that because if they're going to build this library, they got to have when you have a great library, you can, I've always got my curtains here closed because you don't want to fade the books. Or you got to have them in some sort of case so everything doesn't fade in yellow and fox. So they decide to take that out, and when they lift the domed window off, they break the damn thing. You knew they were going to do it. They break the damn thing, and Laszlo has one of his friends with him that he met in the what do you call them? What do you call this? At a flop house. He's living in a flop house, and he meets this other guy, and then they're homeless, and they're going to get food, and he tries to advocate for the other guy and get the guy's kid some food. So he seems like a good guy right there. But anyway, he's helping him, so he does help his friends, and they try to take this dome window off, and of course they break the glass ceiling. Get it? I thought that was a little cheap in the movie. And then anyway, so they end up changing this whole library into a totally, it's not a postmodernistic dead tech bullshit house like Al Pacino has in Heat. It's a modernist, symmetrical but modernist, almost octagonal looking library that ends up being an Architectural Digest set piece for a chair. You can't even see the books. And so Guy Pearce shows up, and he finally shows up, and he's like, "What the hell? What the hell did you do to my library?" And so the son fires the guys, and then he doesn't pay them. So now Adrian Brody's back to living on the streets, and he's just living in damn squalor. And, one of the things about this, again, this belligerent victimhood, one of the things about this is that why can't this guy ever help himself? Have some fucking, excuse my language, have some dignity. Get up and, look, if you, later on he says that he trained, he was at the Bauhaus and he has buildings of note. Well, if that's the case, then when he comes over to America, he would have a network of people that he knows. Now he knows his cousin, but he wouldn't have this squalid, bacterial existence living here. And it's just pretty gross. But so he goes to work in this coal mine, or he's moving coal or whatever. Then he's up and he's on a crane and he's with the other guy, and it's a good shot. It's good shots. You see the city and all this shit. One thing about that is I wondered why they didn't have them working on the skyscrapers. The thing to do would be to have these guys, especially his buddy. These would be the exact guys. Maybe, probably not Adrian Brody's character, but you would have them working on skyscrapers because they got nothing to lose, and these guys they're living on the edge, and you got to have people who have skills building these buildings. But I think they didn't have that because they didn't have the location shots for that because they're in Hungary, and Hungary's great. Hungary's Hungary's great, but we're using Hungary as Pennsylvania and New York in this movie, so it's a little weird. Anyway, so where it really gets started, it's like an hour into the damn movie. So he's up on the crane. He comes down and he's in the coal pit or whatever. And then Guy Pearce shows up and he's like, "Yeah, Mister." He's like this. "Oh, Mr. Toth, very wonderful to meet you." And so he invites him to lunch. Adrian Brody is supposed to be like a homeless guy who never eats. And yet he's like, "No, I don't want any lunch." And then they go to this diner, and because they're in late 40s, early 50s America, and there's no internet, and there's no research, and there's no books, and there was the war, and they can't figure, they don't know they can't research anything. You wouldn't know who the guy is, I suppose, but he has done his research, and he's figured out who this guy is. And he says, "You're Laszlo Toth. I didn't know that. My fathead son didn't pay you, so here's the money." And he gives him the money, and he's like, "Oh, I don't want to take the money." Of course this guy's going to take the money, and I'm not going to say any more than that. But of course he's going to take the money, okay? You know what I mean. He's going to take the money. I think he's going to take the money. I think he's going to take the money. Is he going to take the money? I think he's going to take the money. So he takes the money. But then he's talking to him, and he's like, "So you're this guy. Here are your buildings. You built some shit." And he's like, "Yes, and he whatever." And this weird thing happens where you don't really understand why Guy Pearce is acting the way that he does in the movie. Yeah, he's kind of a creepy, he's a real rich guy, and, he's some sort of industrialist or something. But you're kind of both put off and intrigued by why he talks the way that he does. Because the way that he talks to him is like, he really puts him up on this pedestal. I guess pedestal is accurate for a way of describing an architectural movie. And he's like this, "I find our conversations stimulating." And you're like, okay, that's kind of weird. And so anyway, he says, "I want you to come back. I want you to redesign the house, and I want you to come to a party, a Christmas party." And of course the guy's like, "I don't want to come." I'm not going to do an impression. But he don't want to go to a Christmas party, of course. But anyway, he goes to this Christmas party. And he's like, I'm going to pay you for the old thing. I'll pay you for the new thing. I want you to, I want you to come here and we want to talk to you. So he invites Adrian Brody. So Adrian Brody goes to the Christmas party, and there's all these people, and then they have this discussion, and this is the duologue scene where it starts off as a monologue from Adrian Brody, but Guy Pearce, they're sitting there having their brandy or whatever, and he says to him, why architecture? Let me see if I can find I want to find the monologue here. Hold on a second. Adrian Brody's, what do we call this? Why architecture? Speech. Let me see if I can find this. Let's see. Let me see if I can find the actual script here, and I'll pull it up. Let's see, in the script. Because we need to probably quote it in full. I don't want to see. Oh yeah, on Reddit they were talking about how it's pulled from a Cormac McCarthy speech, but that's not it. Let's see. Where is it? Let me see if I can pull up the script. This is. Let's see. Brutalist script. Let's pull this up. Let's go to Script Slug, you guys. We'll go to Script Slug. Oh. Okay. We're gonna start lagging here a little bit because I'm showing this, but nope, I don't want that. Give me the damn screenplay. This is more trouble than it's worth. Skip the ad. What are you talking about? I have an ad blocker. Oh my God, this is more trouble than it's worth. Read the screenplay. Give me the screenplay. Okay, well, now I can't find the screenplay. Okay, all right, so whatever. He basically says, nope. Give me the screenplay, PDF. Let's see. Let's see if this is it. Here we go. All right, I'll take us through this. I can find it on here. Because this is worth it. Bear with me here. I'm boomer teching it. It's a long ass screenplay. Van Buren's study. Here we go. Let's see. Okay, that's where he meets him. This is the Christmas scene. Okay, so he says, first of all, he introduces him. He says, Van Buren says he won't tout his own accomplishments, but Mr. Toth's work is celebrated throughout much of Western and Central Europe, and there have been many features about him in the architecture journals if you follow that sort of thing. And then he talks about where's his wife. This is another point I'm going to get to. All right, listen. This is how the screenplay goes. I'll tell you shortly before they die. He says, you might have concluded from our prior interactions I am blunt, not hyperbolic or particularly sentimental, but my mother was defenseless to their chumminess. He wants to build this gigantic structure, and it's in honor of his mother, which is a kind of Sophoclean conflict that occurs that's weird in the movie. Oh, here it is. Okay. So he says, why architecture? And he says, Laszlo says, nothing can be of its own explanation. Is there a better description of a cube than that of its construction? You know, some years ago in March, a stranger knocked at the classroom door of the university where I frequently lectured. At once, all that was familiar and important to us was gone. We were too well known at home. I thought my reputation might help to protect us, but it was the opposite. There was no way to remain anonymous, nowhere for my family to go. There was a war on, and yet it is my understanding that many of the sites of my projects have survived and are still there in the city. When the terrible here's the important part. Yeah, cube. Yeah. He says, when the terrible recollections of what happened in Europe have ceased to humiliate us, I expect them to serve instead as a political stimulus, sparking the upheavals that so frequently occur in the cycles of peoplehood. I already anticipate a communal rhetoric of anger and fear. A whole river of such frivolities may flow undammed, but my buildings were devised to endure such erosion of the Danube's shoreline. And Van Buren says, what a poetic reply. You must have been a beloved professor. I've said it before, but I do find our conversations intellectually stimulating. But the point is that what he's saying here is that, hold on, let me switch back here. What he's saying is that brutalism, in a sense, and his buildings will serve as he says, a political stimulus. And this is where what he builds is really, I think really satanic in the movie. So he takes him up to the top of this hill, and he says, I want you to, this hilltop is where I'm going to build this thing in honor of my mother, the Titan. The Titan says this. And this turns into a kind of tour de force construction of this giant building that's going to overlook this town in Pennsylvania. But what happens is that they've got to get the okay from the town planning committee. They got to get the people down there have to okay this gigantic thing that they're going to build. And so the construction of it keeps changing. And the people down in the town are based, and they demand, hey, if you're going to build this damn thing up here, you better build a church. We want a church up there as part of this gigantic complex, which is going to be some sort of museum structure, meeting place, some sort of UN type of, dead tech place. We better have a church up there. And so Laszlo doesn't want that. And then he decides to basically build, and he ends up building these two gigantic concrete Jachin and Boaz with a cross made of sunlight. Now that sounds okay. That's pretty cool. I mean, the cross, we got light, and it's the cross, right? And that sounds great. But what it actually means in the movie is that it's the cross in absentia. It becomes a cross made of absence. So, in other words, it's a way around for him to surreptitiously do the thing they want him to do and build a church without building a church. He builds a cross without building a cross. Now, the irony is that the cross wins anyway, because the cross is light and because there is a cross that dominates the town. And guess what? You still had to build one. But he doesn't build one. And when he finishes with this thing, it ends up as this concrete temple of nothingness where no one will go and no one is going to pray in this place. And it looks like the hollowed out remnants of Queen Jadis's forlorn, empty castle made of nothing with no people. It's totally depopulated. And most of the building is filmed on location in other buildings that are brutalist buildings full of water reservoirs and dams. So the whole thing ends up being a kind of basement. And this is part of what I think the political movement of this is, because what I'm going to talk about right now is this is H1tler and the Power of Aesthetics and the new German movement, which took a lot from Bauhaus. But when you have political buildings, or when you have architecture in a new, let's say in fascist architecture, those are mainly neoclassical. They're taken from Rome, Greece and Rome. You know, H1tler's thoughts about Greece were that he lamented the fact that they had to intervene in Greece, and he refused to destroy any of the classical temples or any of the classic Greek art. He also didn't want to destroy anything. I mean, he really didn't want to do anything in London until he says that drunk Churchill basically bombed them and made them retaliate. Now, take that how you will. But the point is that a lot of brutalist architecture is informed by the war, and especially informed by fascist architecture. And my reason for that, my evidence for that, is in the film. It's in the film. So what we find out in the film is that Laszlo goes crazy when they change the dimensions of the ceilings in the building. And we think it's because he doesn't want to have to, hey, Em, Greg, good to see you too. He doesn't want to have to compromise on his construction in the building. He doesn't want to change anything because he's the genius. But what it actually is, and we learn this in the epilogue, is that he doesn't want to change the dimensions of the ceilings and the width of the rooms because they are mirrored and they are informed by his time in the sea camps in World War II. So he was at Dachau and the other place, and those were the dimensions of his cells. And so that in the past is prologue, and that informs his later building. And this is his belligerent victimhood, because he wants to take this thing that he was subject to and use it to dominate the hillside of this town. And so he surreptitiously doesn't build, but he builds by not building. Does that make any sense? And we learn that in the epilogue. And the part of the problem is that the epilogue really probably shouldn't have been in the movie. The epilogue basically is the movie goes through cycles, and we end up in the end at the Biennale. Oh, the Biennale! We end up at the Venice Biennale in 1980, so we time jump forward. And at this point, Laszlo is being wheelchaired in by his wife and his niece, who is now married. But his niece plays... His niece actually then plays, they use the same actress, I don't know. And we learn in the description that all the reasons for him doing this. Now, this would have been better without the epilogue, because we would have been left to interpretation. We could have figured that out in the movie anyway, and we could have had some more interpretation with it. It would have been not more open-ended, but it would have left more room from the resounding echo effect of the interior of the Brutalist building. It would have mirrored content, or form and function would have followed each other. But instead, we are told what to think. And this is really weird, because the movie is mainly about showing us all these images and showing us how the buildings are constructed. And in the end, we end up being told what to think. And maybe that's part of, maybe that's another purposeful element in the film, because essentially but it doesn't seem to match. That doesn't match. Because if the overt building and construction of, for instance, Berlin during prior to World War II and up to World War II has massive hulking buildings that are supposed to uplift people. That's what they did. They were supposed to unify people into a nation, make them understand their loyalty to their nation and their people, and also uplift their spirits. But they also ended up serving as bunkers because of the oncoming war, and they literally did do that. So you have these massive buildings which also house all these people when the bombing starts. And if that's the case, that is overt. That's in your face. You know that. You know it's also part of a martial and a militant society, so you know that. But this is an image where no people will go, and it's a sort of opposite of that. It's like a vacuum effect with buildings. So it ends up being something totally sinister overlooking the town. Does that make sense? And the rest of the movie is basically spent in a kind of weird haze of ugliness where the character, one thing that occurs in this, which really, again, is another thing that makes you not understand these characters, is you wonder, where is your wife? So we learn that he's got a wife. The Titan says to him, where's your wife? And he's like, oh, she's still back in the old world. Why? So you're telling me you got on the ship and you came over here and you left your wife over there? And not only left your wife, but we're talking years after the war. Years after the war, she is still there. And by the time they bring her over, because this guy can bring her over, he can bypass political constraints, and he can get through government people, and he can get this woman over here. So when she finally shows up, what's the name? Felicity Jones shows up. Felicity Jones, who's usually beautiful. A lot of these people love playing physically ugly characters, and that they think that and she actually is great. She's going to be great in anything she does. She's a good actress. But they love playing physically deformed characters because they think that lends them gravitas. So she shows up, and she's got calcium deficiency, just like C.S. Lewis. And he sees her on the walkway by the train. Of course, it's a train. That's where they last saw each other, was at the train. So now we have to be confronted with the train. So he sees her, and he's like, I don't know if that is her. Is that her? You don't recognize your damn wife, dude. You don't recognize your wife? It's only been a couple years. And why has it been so many years? What are you... These silly billies. It's really maddening. Because it just shows you... It's completely insular. It's all... This whole thing is egomaniacal. These types of characters are uplifted in their degradation. The more degradation, the higher they go on the ladder. And he's completely empty inside. Yeah, and so she shows up, and anyway, the famous scene in the movie is the very last scene in the movie. She confronts the Titan because when they ended up at this marble quarry in Italy, and this was weird because I kind of, at this point I was like, all right, whatever, and I wasn't really even watching at this point in the fucking movie. I watched the movie, but at this point, Guy Pearce and Adrian Brody go to the quarry and they're looking at all this beautiful marble, and all of a sudden they're confronted and I'm like, what just wait, what just happened? So then we learn, I guess, that all of his stimulating, he was stimulated, all right. He not only wanted to have him build this building and make all these changes because he was psychotic, but because he wanted to own him. He wanted to own him Al Crowley style, I guess. And I'm like, what? Because then when they're coming out of the quarry, they're just walking like normal. Do you understand? Do you understand? This is a full-on Marcellus Wallace scene. This was a full-on Marcellus Wallace. I guess. I don't know. I guess that's what happened in the movie. So he gets violated. Um, and then we get to the Biennale, and then that happens, and then the movie's over. And then we end the movie with this weird, like, Devo music, which was odd because I mentioned earlier the postmodern dissonance. Most of the movie is spent with this sort of echoing dissonant soundtrack. The score that got nominated, by the way, and thank you to Ishmael Gracia. Hey, welcome to High IQ Book Enjoyer. Thank you for that membership. Call him Ishmael. Yeah. I'm telling you, you won't like this movie. I watched it this is truly a movie I watched so that you don't have to. And, this sort of dissonance that occurs. Anyway, I also, let me write down, let me show you a couple of notes here, then I'm going to get into some of these things about brutalism. Concentrated concentration, Bauhaus versus brutalism. The reaction, brutalism, to Nazi architecture is even more devoid of humanity than the brutality of the buildings it's reacting to. Dialectical material, postmodern politic. The aim of the brutalist is overtly political and a subversive anonymity. This is the belligerent victimhood of globalist and postmodern politic. Toth wants his buildings to stand the test of time and political upheavals, to shove a hulking structure into the face of the onlooker, just as he thinks the sea camps blight the countryside of the European citizenry. The quote, how could they not see, that kind of quote. And replace the skyline, he intends anti-aestheticism to be a rallying point for future upheavals, to shove a hulking structure into the face of the onlooker, just as he thinks the sea camps blight the countryside. He manages to build a structure on a hilltop dominating a town and financed by a capitalist titan that shows a cross made of absence in which no people will worship and remind them of death. Too bad for his diabolical anger. The cross always wins and lights the structure and the altar despite him. There is an inverted cross that appears in the film, but it's really utterly pretty satanic how this occurs in the film. And just to take you through The New Brutalism by Raynar Banham, a couple of things that he says here about brutalism. Of course, this is Beton, Brut, keep it Brut. This is Le Corbusier, who wanted to demolish and raze Paris and is largely responsible for housing projects as aesthetic terrorism. This says, introduce an observer into any field of forces, influential or communications, and that field becomes distorted. It is common opinion that Das Kapital has played old Harry with capitalism so that Marxists can hardly recognize it when they see it, and the widespread diffusion of Freud's ideas has wrought such havoc with clinical psychology that any intelligent patient can make a nervous wreck of his analyst. What has been the influence of contemporary architectural historians on the history of contemporary architecture? They've created the idea of a modern movement. This was known even before Basil Taylor took arms against false historicism, and beyond that, they've offered a rough classification of the isms, which are the thumbprint of modernity, into two main types. One, like cubism, is a label, a recognition tag, applied by critics and historians to a body of work which appears to have certain consistent principles running through it, whatever the relationship of the artist. The other, like futurism, is a banner, a slogan, a policy consciously adopted by a group of artists, whatever the apparent similarity or dissimilarity of their products. And it's entirely characteristic of the new brutalism, our first native art form since the new art history arrived here, that it should confound these categories and belong to both at once. That's brutalism. Let's see. And the other point in this essay that I wanted to bring out is Among the non-Marxist grouping, there was no particular unity of program or intention, but there was a certain community of interests, a tendency to look toward Le Corbusier and to be aware of something called Le Beton Brut. To know the quotation which appears at the head of this article, and in the case of the more sophisticated and aesthetically literate, to know of the art brut of Jean Dubuffet and his connection in Paris. Words and ideas, personalities and discontents chimed together, and in a matter of weeks, long before the third program and the monthlies had got hold of the phrase, it had been appropriated as their own by their own desire and public consent by two young architects, Allison and Peter Smithson. A lot of this is when you look at the South Bank of London, when you look at especially the National Theatre, this is a particular instance of brutalism. The first time I saw the National Theatre in London, I was sort of confounded by that. I had a friend from drama school who went on to be in his Dark Materials when they first performed it at the National Theatre, and I remember looking up the National. I was in Belfast at this point, and I looked up the National Theatre, and I couldn't understand what I was looking at. This is the theater. I must be looking at the wrong place. Sort of an architectural ignorance at the time, but it is a mass of bunkered down slabs, and that is part of the point because, of course, in post-war London, one of the things about brutalism is that in post-war London, and especially in post-war Europe, and then into America, where a lot of these guys immigrated, we have a lack of building materials because of the war effort, and so there begins to be a movement of stripped-down material and minimalism combined with the heavy aesthetic echoes of the war. And that ends up being what these brutalist buildings are. Now, one of the main things is that in the Paris, the Paris exposition in the 30s, when they had the architectural competitions, both Germany and Russia, they both tied. And they had two facing buildings. They were both facing each other, and they sort of formed the twin pillars of this dialectical materialism, and that ends up being a dialectical material. We have two types of buildings that are physical structures embodying a political movement. So we have Soviet architecture and we have Nazi architecture, but they both are born out of the cauldron of war, or what was going to become war. And obviously we were leading up to World War Part 2. And Caravaggio says Europe never really recovered financially or otherwise from WW2. And yeah, that's one of the other paradoxes, I think, of this whole thing, is that one thing that I'll tell you this. One thing that H1tler said about Germany was he says this is from page 29 of this book right here, and he says the warlord who built up the greatest land army since Napoleon regretted having to spend money on weapons that could have been devoted to the arts. In 1937, as German rearmament was getting into high gear, he admonished his party comrades at the party rally to keep in mind that, quote, the armament of a nation is morally justified only when it serves as a shield and sword of a higher mission. On another occasion, around the same time, when warned of the immense cost of a gigantic stadium planned in Nuremberg, he responded defiantly, that is less than 2 battleships of the Bismarck class. How quickly a warship can be destroyed, and if not, it is scrap iron anyhow in 10 years, but this building will stand for centuries. Once the war was well underway, he uttered perhaps his choicest comment, it is a pity that I have to wage war on account of that drunk Churchill instead of serving the works of peace. Early in the Russian campaign, when German armies were in sight of Moscow and the war appeared close to a victorious end, he remarked on how quickly wars are forgotten. By the time of the War of the Spanish Succession, no one remembered the 30 Years' War. The battles around 1700 were forgotten after Frederick the Great's wars. Sedan replaced the Battle of Leipzig. Tannenberg, as well as our campaigns in Poland and the West, will fade after the current one in the East. One day this will also be forgotten. Our buildings, however, will stand. The whole point of power, he went on to say, was to produce cultural wonders. And he promised that after winning his war, the funds he would devote to these will vastly exceed the expenditures which we found necessary for the conduct of the war. In this sense, he considered war a step towards his final goal of founding a culture state. Looking back over his career, he lamented in October 1941, "If I were to assess my work, I would first emphasize that in the face of an uncomprehending world, I succeeded in making the, I can't say that word, idea the basis of life, and second, that I made culture the driving force in German greatness." Isn't that crazy? So that's the point. Here I said, let's see, aggressive intent in architecture. National pride and political intimidation is the overt, visible purpose of Hitlerian architecture. Brutalism is the covert intimidation of reactionary revolution. So it says on page 321 of this book, although architecture offered H1tler the main outlet for his aesthetic drive, it was also an important political instrument. Like other leaders in history, he used it as a means of developing national pride. Quote, "Why put up these huge public buildings?" he asked in a speech to construction workers. "I do this to restore each individual German his self-respect. In 100 areas, I want to say this to the individual. We are not inferior. On the contrary, we are complete equals of every other nation." This was a message he repeated over and over in his speeches. At the same time, he wanted his buildings to be a medium of political intimidation. His architecture was motivated not by a desire for ostentation, he said, but by the coldest calculation. It had restored German self-assurance and had gradually brought the country to a recognition that it was not second-rate, but equal to every other nation in the world, including America. Can you fault him for this? That was why Berlin was to be made the greatest city in the world, Munich the greatest culture capital, and Linz the greatest arts center, and Hamburg the greatest port. As for the Autobahns, they are being built not just for transport alone, but in the conviction that it was necessary to restore to the German people the self-confidence that they had lost and that a nation of 80 million people deserves and needs. That's pretty crazy. So the point of a lot of this modernist art, we all know about Jackson Pollock and CIA and Tavistock Institute, but when it comes to a lot of this stuff, the point, I think, is chaos. Modernism, of course, really gets going in 1910. I mean, 1901 was the beginning of the modern era with the death of Queen Victoria, especially in literature. But with art and architecture, 1910 is where it begins. Then we have the Armory Show. And the Armory Show in art is where you have Marcel Duchamp, who had the nude descending a staircase, which is a sort of fractured view of what later would be adopted as Cubism. But we also had the famous urinal on the wall, which was utterly scandalous and still is, because that still lasts. The statement he was making was, this is trash, it's degradation, this is depravity, and the art market is almost like trolling, money laundering and trolling. But then we have the Surrealist Manifesto, which is occultic. And then eventually after the war, at the drop of the A-bomb, of course, we split the century into two, and we have the postmodern era. And the postmodern goes into the post-post, and then the post-post-postmodern, and we're still dealing with that. And the what happened as a result of all this stuff, how it resonated into the 21st century, is that now we have minimalized and destroyed and made war on beauty to such an extent that the asymmetrical concrete slab structure of brutalism, which has a certain kind of anti-beauty to it. I actually don't mind the big brutalist buildings. I think that a lot of them are cool. I think that they're like interesting because of variety. So if your whole city looks like that, then you live in you essentially live in Clockwork Orange. Remember, I lived with my mama and dad, my mom and dad What does he say? Hold on. He says, I lived with my mama and dad in municipal flat block A, linear north. Right? And he's walking through this brutalist, postmodern hellscape. But there's something that's interesting. But when that's your whole city, when that's your whole place, you end up in basically Bed-Stuy projects as everything. You end up in prison world. You end up in we end up in where we are now, which is that the entire American landscape has changed into gray boxes. Everything is gray boxes. I talked about this when I came back from Buffalo last time. You guys remember one of the things that I noticed was all of the non-gray boxes. There's some sort of reactionary movement against this. There's a kind of revival of mom and pop stores and non-chain things, like people with small businesses and hotels with actual family names. Not that look, there's something to be said for the Radisson or for Holiday Inn. Just like there's something, when I lived in Europe, one of the things my dad commented on this was that when we would travel Europe, my dad would always say like Starbucks is what it is, but there's something to be said for it, because when you are in a foreign landscape, when you're in an alien landscape, you do want the things that remind you of home. You want to be able to rely on certain things. So if you want a cup of coffee like home, or you want something that you can, as an anchor point, you can go to the Starbucks. And in the 2000s, early 2000s, that was cool. Now everything's a Starbucks. Does that make sense? So, now everything, like in the suburbs, for instance, there are entire cities you go to here, especially if you're once you get past the warehouse land and you get past the manufacturing places, which are functional, now you end up in places which are a service economy materialized. So I think it's a crazy kind of war on beauty. It's an aesthetic terrorism when you long for the days of the sunroom at Wendy's. I mean, do you remember Wendy's? Do you remember that? I know this guy who, he's a friend of a friend, and whenever I see this guy, like I'll see him like every 5 years at a Christmas party. Whenever I see him, we have this handshake, and we always say, Wendy's, 99, Spring, Broad Street. Because that's where I first met this dude, and we had lunch. We were sitting there, we went to lunch or something. We were eating at Wendy's, and we were in the sunroom. And you long for the days of the fucking excuse my language, sunroom at Wendy's. And now even Wendy's is a gray box. Everything's a gray box. Everything. And it's not steel and concrete anymore. Now it's carbon fiber and fiberglass. It's the kind of landscape where, the Wizard of Oz was so revelatory, so predictive, because when the giant fire twister comes, it's going to suck all that up, and there's just nothing. It won't take the Brutalist buildings, though. The German buildings withstood heavy bombing and artillery. There are some of those buildings that are 3 feet thick in concrete. I mean, the Reichstag building was the main one. Now, that's not a Brutalist building, but the bunker aspect of my point is that there is a delineation between the mid-war and pre-war architecture of modernity, which had a neoclassical provenance, which had a foundation and an insular aspect of protection from the outside with slabs of concrete. That became what Laszlo Toth does in the movie, which is a political statement that stands in the middle of the city so that the globalist, postmodern, nihilistic nothing sphere can rally around that and use that as a political impetus to depop and destroy more, because it resembles nothingness. It's surrounding of nothing. I said, let's see, it says in this essay, admittedly, brutalist architecture, this emphasis on basic structure is important, even if it's not the whole story. And what has caused Hunstanton to lodge in the public's gullet is the fact that it's almost unique among modern buildings in being made of what it appears to be made of, which is what Laszlo Toth's point was with the cube. Whatever's been said about honest use of materials, most modern buildings appear to be made of whitewash or patent glazing, even when they're made of concrete or steel. Hunstanton appears to be made of glass, brick, steel, and concrete, and is in fact made of glass, brick, steel, and concrete. Water and electricity do not come out of unexplained holes in the wall, but are delivered to the point of use by visible pipes and manifest conduits. One can see what Hunstanton is made of and how it works, and there is not another thing to see except the play of spaces. That becomes postmodern architecture. You notice whenever you see buildings where like the pipes are painted in multicolors, and we have a kind of juxtaposition of weird, almost sloganistic patterns painted on the sides of buildings as their facade. That's what postmodern architecture becomes. But that arises out of this. And I said, compared to dignity and the human body's piping and chemistry, or rather contrast. This exposure seems to aim for some kind of Darwinian Marxist interior as facade. So I think that, this kind of ties into the fact that I think that the triumvirate of evil in the 20th century really is, and leading up to the 20th century, is really Nietzsche, Darwin, and Freud are the kind of Victorian era triumvirate of total evil that results in much of what guides the 20th century. And here we have, this is a mechanics of brutalism. The qualities of that object may be summarized as follows. 1, formal legibility of plan. 2, clear exhibition of structure. 3, valuation of materials for their inherent qualities as found. This is a kind of functioning quality of architecture which really resembles, takes on a literary aspect. It really resembles a lot of literature in terms of futurism. This summary can be used to answer the question, are there other new brutalist buildings besides Hunstanton? It is interesting to note that such a summary of qualities can be made to describe Marseille, Promontory and Lakeshore Apartments, General Motors Technical Center, much recent Dutch work, and several projects by younger English architects affiliated to CIAM. But with the possible exception of Marseille, the brutalists would probably reject most of these buildings from the canon, and so must we, for all these structures exhibit an excess of suaviter in modo, even if there's plenty of fortite in re about them. In the last resort, what characterizes the new brutalism is, and this is brutalism, is architecture as in painting is precisely its brutality. Only one other building conspicuously carries these qualities in that way that Hunstanton does, and this is the Louis Kahn's Yale Art Center. Here is a building which is uncompromisingly frank about its materials, which is inconceivable apart from frame, and it's as revolutionary and unconventional as the use of the plastic theory in stressing Hunstanton's steel H frames. Furthermore, the plan is very formal in the disposition of its main elements and makes a kind of symmetry about two clearly defined axes at right angles to one another. And this is a building which some brutalists can apparently accept as a constituent new brutalist structure. That reminds me of Hugh Kenner. There's the smartest man in the world. Hugh Kenner was a great scholar who was friends with James Laughlin and New Directions Publishing in the 20th century. That guy was a CIA Mockingbird. But Hugh Kenner was a Yale professor. Was he Yale? I think he was Yale. He was concurrent with Harold Bloom. But Hugh Kenner was old school, and he was the world's authority really on William Carlos Williams, Ezra Pound, and a lot of the modernist writers, especially in verse. And I'll never forget what he said about William Carlos Williams. William Carlos Williams is, I like William Carlos Williams' writing, and in terms of what it became, it's different. But William Carlos Williams is really the uber modernist American poet. He went to La Rosey School, of course, which is where this is the CIA boarding school, which is where Richard Helms and I think Kim Jong Un went there, and all these people. It's also where Julian Casablancas met Albert Hammond Jr. But it's a CIA boarding school in Switzerland. I call it CIA boarding school, but anyway, William Carlos Williams went there, and then he later studied. He was later in Paris with the modernists such as Hemingway, and he said he went from writing verse, Elizabethan verse, which became outmoded in the 20th century, and then when he switched to his imagism, which was also it was parallel with Ezra Pound. They knew each other, but it was parallel with Ezra Pound. And he said, poems are not made of ideas. They're not made of beautiful ideas. They're made of words. And that really is a statement on modernity, which makes sense. Because when you filter that down, it's the kind of thing where you think about when you were in like elementary school or something. We called it lower school and prep school. And you write, you're doing creative writing and you write poems and they're feelings. And Ezra Pound, said that basically you have to write every day like you're at a construction job. But if you try to write a poem about the death of a loved one that day and think it's going to work, it won't. You have to give it time and revision over 6 months. And this is where he came up with in the station of the metro, the apparition of these petals in the crowd. The apparition of these faces in the crowd, petals on a wet black bough, the people coming out of the Paris metro. And this is the same with William Carlos Williams. He said, no ideas but in things. So he has the poem, The Red Wheelbarrow, which is famous or very infamous. So much depends upon the red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. Hugh Kenner explains that not explains it, but he sort of deconstructs it by saying, first of all, you cannot imagine that being said. You cannot imagine that being said. And the poem functions as the thing. It is representative of itself. Now, that doesn't mean it has to be nihilistic and empty. It just means that we are deconstructing poetry to sort of build it up, to break it away from the poetry of the Victorian era, where the syntax is determined by the rhyme scheme. So we're breaking away from that old order, and now we have something where words are being reinvented for what they really are. That leads into the postmodern era, where words are completely redefined, just like building materials are completely redefined, just like everything in the city is totally redefined. So, first of all, in this essay, when you look at a brutalist building, you cannot imagine that being a thing. You cannot imagine that being in existence. Have you ever looked at the building in Bilbao? Let's see if I can find that real quick. We'll find the Bilbao Museum, because this is sort of a shimmering example of brutalism. The Guggenheim Bilbao. I don't know. Can you see this? Let me click on one of these. This is the Guggenheim Bilbao. Do you see that? This is not a brutalist building, but look right there. It's got the not the Buñuel. Who did the spider? I never noticed that before. I never noticed that the spider from Enemy. Let me blow this up a little bit. I never noticed that the spider from Enemy is in this. Do you see right here? You see the spider? Who did this? Who was it who did the spider? What surrealist artist did the spiders? This was an occultic spider. Oh yeah, Louis Bourgeois. That's it. The woman behind the spider. You remember the spider in the movie Enemy that we covered? That's it right there. I never noticed that before. The one that hovers over the city. Look at that. That's crazy. I never noticed that. That's globist modernity right there. And that right there is it's a shimmering example, a shimmering facade which masks a kind of asymmetrical quasi-brutalism, I think. Let's look at some other. Let's look at the. I was talking about the National Theater, London. Yeah, there you go. Look at that. That is South Bank. That's one of the most brutalist buildings that there is. Right there. It's just slabs of layers. Of course, inside you have this pretty magnificent theater right here. But look at this. Let's see. Let's look at some other things. Okay, this one is crazy. This is is this the Yale? I think this is the Yale School of Architecture and Design right here. This top left one. You see on the top right there, the non-brutalist wonders of the world, top left. That's where you have a kind of cradle, above ground cradle for the school itself, which looks like it's being swallowed up in the hands of a titan. You see the harsh angles. Brutalist House, Iceland. Look at that. I mean, it's a cool looking building. I mean, that's pretty cool, but in any kind of spiritual sense, that's the world sliding into the Promethean rock. Of course, one of the biggest examples is, we have buildings like this, like the FED HQ in DC, which is, a de-lengthening of floors. It looks like top heavy. Now, the buildings in the Soviet Union like this, where we have, they are functional. We have functional buildings where we have, of course, masses of apartment complexes in these huge slabs. What's the very famous one? There's one in Brazil. Is this it? Yeah, this is it. Look at this building. That's called ziggurat style. And the residents have masked it they've tried to mask it with foliage. So they've foliated the place. Yeah, Jason, that's like Frank Lloyd Wright. Well, the thing about Frank Lloyd Wright is that Frank Lloyd Wright is sort of touted as the great American architect. And this is obviously coming from, I really don't know anything about architecture. But I do know that Frank Lloyd Wright and the Prairie style is touted as, one of the great American styles, but that's because it is uniquely American, and it's where you're supposed to bring in the outside into the interior. So falling water, of course, has the waterfall through the house. A lot of times Frank Lloyd Wright would build around rocks and structures. I think I've heard this. I don't know if this is accurate, but I've heard that one of the problems with buying a Frank Lloyd Wright house is that they also come with furniture. All the furniture is that's right, top heavy inversions kit. A lot of the furniture is incorporated as set pieces for the exterior of the building, and that you can't change anything. I don't know if that's still true. I'll give you an example of this versus modernist architecture. There's a building by what's that guy? modernist house on the river. What's the guy? Is Ambassador Walter Rice. The Rice House. This is it. So this place right here this is not brutalist. This is a modernist house, and Richard Neutra, he was the architect. This place is pretty cool. When I was growing up in my neighborhood, if you go, we would ride our bikes down, and there was a big we called it Jurassic Park, and it was like a gigantic Japanese thing, which you rode your bike under, and you keep going down this private road. You get all the way to the end of the road, and there's a big train track, and you have to cross over the canal and across the train tracks and on this private bridge, and then you go up on this hilltop, and there's the Richard Neutra house, which at the time when I was growing up was owned by Ambassador Walter Rice. He was the ambassador to Japan, and he was an old man, and we would like hang out down there and stuff, and we weren't supposed to, but we did. And I think it's on the National Register, and it's a modernist house. It's clean lines, pools. I feel like Scuff Realtor. Clean lines, shimmering pool overlooking the river. Lots of concrete and glass, and it's a minimalist style. You look at this. Look at that right here. I mean, it's pretty cool. It's devoid of character, but that's sort of that's the meta character that you get from this. It's a kind of the lack of character becomes the character. So the form follows function. Everything seems to be functional in the house, but that's not what makes a home, and that's part of the criticism of brutalism. Let me find some more examples. So of course we have a lot of these. The Philip Morris headquarters here is a brutalist building. See this terraced futuristic style right here. We also have, I'll show you the aluminum building. Aluminium. So this is an interesting building. It's basically Reynolds Wrap. Reynolds Wrap is the aluminum, right? Worldwide. The headquarters is here. The Reynolds family is here. Or neighbors of mine. And this is it's kind of a spaceship-looking building. Originally became offices. But it's an interesting building. It looks like a Reynolds Wrap space. This building right here is just the James Monroe building. That's a pretty sort of basic looking brutalist building in downtown Richmond with these two tower blocks in the background are examples of what I think brutalism has become, which is that originally when they were built, these were luxury condos, and I think they still are. But these things degrade and they become housing projects like this. This is what you see when you're leaving Bed-Stuy. These like quadrilateral weird buildings, like this Jay-Z launches Bitcoin Academy, like right there, like that. Let's see if we can find a Corbusier building, and then I'll show you the chair. These are some Corbusier buildings, which this style right here, this pavilion, this becomes postmodern, which looks like a vestigial or whatever. What do you call those guys? Vestigial? Remember I don't know, whatever. Anyway, I'll show you the Corbusier chair, because this is modernism right here. There's also the Mies van der Rohe chair. This is a Mies van der Rohe chair right here, the second one, Barcelona style. That. Here's the famous Mies van der Rohe chair. Van der Rohe chair. I actually have two knockoff versions of this. It's a very expensive chair. I've got two knockoff versions of it in my house, but that's the sort of anti-ergonomic chair by Mies van der Rohe. Now, Mies van der Rohe was an architect who was German. It was Mies van der Rohe who was head of Bauhaus, not Corbusier, I think, as I said. Mies van der Rohe, though, was certainly benefited from Nazi art competitions and eventually made his way to America, where he was quite successful. This is one of my criticisms of Laszlo, Toth, in the movie The Brutalist. Everybody's seen these chairs. These are Shea Brutal, that's right. Yeah, thank you, Hattori Destigel. Who was the band that had that as the album? What's the album? Now I gotta look that one up. That's the postmodern technique of Destigel. What's the Destil? I don't know how you pronounce Destil. Who's the band? Jack White. Yeah, that's it. That's the album. What's that futurist? No, is it the Bauhaus chair? Where's that famous picture of the chair? That's it right there. So that's the chair right there. This one. This right here. That's the Bauhaus chair, Marcel Breuer, and it's basically just totally deconstructed minimalist style with some slight fabric and metallic lines. What's the chair with the woman in the mask? That's it. That right there is one of the symbols of, I mean, this is almost like Metropolis, but this is a very famous surrealist this is where all these modern elements start to blend. Let me show you some Bauhaus. So that's the Bauhaus school, and one of the major things that comes out of Bauhaus is their font, is this font style. So this is Bauhaus right here. And that gives way to, of course, brutalism. There are a couple of good, I like brutalist Tumblr pages back in the day, now Instagram pages, like if you go to Brut, B-R-U-T, I forget what it's called on Instagram. If you look it up right now, I like those pages because they play the hacker and Miss Kitten and sort of like French industrial techno style, Gesaffelstein like plays along with those, like the Pan Am building, a helicopter, a Lynx helicopter, or a Sikorsky landing on top of the Pan Am building. Let me see if I can find that. A helicopter landing on Pan Am building. This is a cool picture. I really do like that picture. I mean, that's a pretty brutalist picture. But there's something very cool about that. I really like that. That's just like a fucking badass picture. But these are corporate structures, and you don't want to live in this. I guess unless you're, some sort of psychopathic titan living in an Ayn Rand novel or something. I don't know. But that's like a cool picture. Look at that. Dude, that's sick. That's a fucking sick picture. That's Atlas Obscura. Anyway, so just a couple other things here. A couple other things about this. Hey, listen, if you want to support the stream, I would appreciate it. You can hit the links provided. You can also super chat me, please. I could use some super chats, you guys. I'm finally on vacation. So today's the first day of vacation. I'm on vacation for a little while. I'll be gone for the next week. We're going to be at a secure location. We're going to be somewhere up north, and so I'll be away. And then when I get back, I'll be here I got to teach a class for a week, and then I'll be back. I'm going to be writing my screenplay. I could use some super chats, and especially if you want to super chat me, Jason has dropped the links right there. Thank you, Jason. Those help the most because they go straight to me, and I really could use those. I've got, I got stacks of books here, but I got to get some stuff done, and I'll be off, and I will be writing my screenplay, which I'll be sharing with you guys, of course. If you want to read some other stuff, you can get that on some of the recent streams. And also, if you want to grab some memberships, if you don't have one, those help support the operation here. And so those really do help out. And I've done some I think 6 out of the last 10 streams have been member streams or gone to member streams. So please check those out. But yeah, I could really use some help with furthering the operation here. I'm going to be reading. Of course, I'm going to continue the Narnia streams, and the next one I'll be doing will be Prince Caspian and Dawn Treader. I'll also be rereading Albert Speer's book over my little break here because I need to get back into some of the things he says about armaments and architecture. Another essay that I have here is Nazi Architecture's Affective Weapon, which I quoted in the video description, which is by Gaston Gordillo, and it's pretty good. This is an essay on H1tler, Speer, and the monuments of Germania. And as the German armies advanced towards Moscow, H1tler said, "Now this will be the end of their building once and for all." And this really goes into some of the plans for building the new Germany with domes, of course, that were supposed to dwarf the city. And he got that from, H1tler only spent like 3 hours when he got to Paris, but he was only able to go to a couple of different places, which, by the way, is one of the things that always annoys me about, one of the only conspiracies that annoys me is the one about H1tler escaping to South America, and I realize a lot of that is tongue in cheek, but it makes sense this is not a stream on H1tler, but it makes sense for Bormann and Mengele and Klaus Barbie to have gone. Klaus Barbie ended up, of course, as a anti-communist CIA paperclip guy running drug operations, and then Mengele escaped because of shenanigans, and Bormann almost certainly. I think Bormann probably almost certainly escaped, but he was the bureaucratic functionary of H1tler. It doesn't make sense that H1tler escaped. First of all, he did have Parkinson's, and Gotterdammerung was the project of final self-annihilation and immolation in the third R thing, because that was his whole purpose was insular. Yes, it expanded, but the whole purpose was insular for those people. So at the final moment of destruction, it makes sense that would be gone and that the body was gone and was also immolated. Because one of these one of the essays talks about H1tler's obsession with fire, and this is actually kind of funny. He said that this is bad, but he said that when he looked at the skyscrapers in New York, all he saw was torches lighting up the sky. And yeah, he had the shakes. He had the shakes real bad. You can see that in the videos or in the films where he is awarding the H-Youth in the final defense of Berlin, and it makes sense. That doesn't make sense metaphysically in terms of who he was. You can read Ian Kershaw and some other books that describe that. But one of the things that's been amazing to me, and I've really noticed, is that, and we all know this, but it is that it is very difficult to find anything anymore that is not only purely objective. I mean, there's really not much objectivity in terms of non-bias. We talked about that in the last stream, but and the one with Maddie, Digital Minefield, real Cooter Brown. But even in discussing, look, let's take the C.S. Lewis book. When I finished this Narnian book, this biography of C.S. Lewis, even in the discussion of C.S. Lewis and his thoughts on women in the clergy, the author has to op-ed. It's like he has to give this, he has to V-signal that he thought this, but I don't believe it, and not many people do. So he goes in consensus fallacy and numbers. Every time, it's with everything. Every subject goes in this. It always has to be scoring a virtuous political point on anything that you read. It's so hard to find anything that just discusses what this is. So, of course, he went to the Pantheon in Rome and found it a monumental place that was, I think he demanded that there be no talking when he went into the thing. He said no one was allowed to speak, and he just stood there in the middle of it. And, of course, that was used later on and in collaboration with Speer to make this gigantic structure, which he then found out that the Soviets were dwarfing, and that pissed him off. So then he wanted to build something bigger. But this says, Speer shows that architecture was central to the NAZI project. Furthermore, he demonstrates that architecture was H1tler's one true passion in life, the only topic that made him joyful, cheerful, and exuberant. H1tler would regularly exclaim, "How much I would have loved to be an architect." His architectural projects went back to the 1920s when he drew sketches of the Berlin that he would build in the capital of the Germanic Empire, so powerful that its monuments would eclipse in size and splendor those of Rome. In his book, he in fact complained that the architecture of German cities lacked monumentality and grandeur. When he first met Speer, he was dazzled by how the latter proposed to give material form to his spatial megalomania. Architecture was not simply the art of giving form to space. It was the art of creating power through monumental spatial forms. Walls and other architectural striations are nonetheless weaponized in a distinctive way as apparatuses of kinetic capture, that is, as material assemblages that control and channel the movement of bodies in space. But that's overt. You get it? That's overt. That's not some sort of inverted subversion meant to point people towards the nihilism of a globist future. And, and yes, someone said that brutalism is shite. Well, yeah, I mean, I think that I don't mind variety in architecture. Like, that's one of the ways that you make a city beautiful. If everything is a neoclassical building, then there's no, the whole thing is hallowed ground. And one of the points that H1tler made was that it's kind of the inverse of that, is that there was no place in any modern city anymore for people to just be and to wonder. Everything had to be commercialized with shops and labels and slogans and buy now. And that's obviously one of the points of all the things he was railing against. And I think that brutalism sort of encompasses that in an inverted way. You go into a place and go completely, you're looking at something huge, but it just makes you go insular. Rather than, for instance, looking at a beautiful Christian cathedral where you are in wonder and you look upwards and it's supposed to remind you of heaven. Or even of a nation and its wonders. So I actually don't mind in a city with some variety. One of the things that for instance, Richmond here did wrong. I scratched my back. One of the things that Richmond did wrong was they tore down a lot of the old buildings. This is Tartaria. No, they tore down a lot of the old buildings and replaced them with the cheap knockoffs of a brutalist building. And they all end up as a kind of neo-city nothingness that is just going to turn into a project and get torn down. And they're all cheaply made. Now, they didn't do that with everything, but if there's variety, it's beautiful. If you have Federalist style, Belle Epoque, modernist, Doric columns, brutalist building. You've got variety. But the brutalist structure on its own that dominates the landscape or the cityscape is shite. This goes into some of the sort of Neo-Grecian aspects of some of these buildings almost becoming temple-like. And one of the biggest examples of these, the Tempelhof, and of course one of the famous examples is the Cathedral of Light with Leni Riefenstahl, and of course the lines of order of the Nuremberg rallies. But the reason I'm going over this, of course, is because it plays counterpoint to the brutalist future of Depop. Look at that. All these apartment buildings, all these apartments, terrace-style ziggurat, like 3 people, and this looming Ayn Rand city in the background. I mean, that's, it is what it is, and it ain't what it ain't, says Maddie. Anyway, that's about it. I kind of had it with all this. I've had it with the Brutalist. But if you want to read more, I've been immersed in architecture for the past week. And if you want to read more, you can do that. There's a bunch of books on this. Hey, thank you for the Super Chats. Let me look at the Super Chats here real quick. I got to thank some people here. Thank you to Ethan for that $20. Really appreciate you on PayPal. Hey, thank you to... Is that Gabrielle? Thank you, Gabrielle, for that $30 on Cash App. That means a lot. Hey, for screenplay funds, thank you. You helped to fund the operation. You helped to fund the screenplay. I need it because, I'm not going to be working. I need to go and I need to get up to the mountains. I'm going up to the mountains into a cabin with no internet. And so I need some McD's money. I need some Big Mac money. I need some Red Bull money. I need some Sig money. The usual things that keep us going. So I appreciate that. Thank you for helping fund that. Hey, thanks to Jason for that $10 on PayPal. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate you, buddy. Thank you to Taylor G for that $3 on PayPal. Thank you so much, bud. Really appreciate you. Of course, again, thank you to Ethan. I don't think I missed any Super Chats last time. I'm not sure if we got any Super Chats on here. Let me check, see if we got any fan funding on here. We got a membership. I know that. Yes, we got Ishmael Gracia. Hey, gracias for the membership. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Today, I'll show you a couple other things because this was fun. Let me pull this up and try to not ding with the... I don't want to ding with the music. Let me see if I can pull this. I'm going to show you what I did today because this was sick, dude. You guys follow me on Instagram. Please. Follow me on Instagram. Bazed Analyzer. I'm going to try and pull this up without freezing here because... this happens. Come on, man. I'm going to show you guys what I was up to today because this was fucking fun. Good, I got that off. I got the volume off. All right, let me show you what I did today. See if I can click over here. Here we go. Check this out. This is what I did today. Yeah, this is call sign Bushmaster 911. We'll be running a strafing run. We're going to get some skinnies right up to the Capitol. We're going to run a vector right around that perimeter. We're going to make sure everybody's safe, secure. Think it, dream it, do it. This is what it's all about. That was fun, dude. I went on a Black Hawk ride today. Yeah, we did a little riding on a Black Hawk. Went on a Black Hawk ride. My buddy, the The Colonel took us on a Black Hawk. Let me see if I can pull this up right here. No, I can't play that one because it'll ding with copyright. But let me play this little. I'll show you the footage. This is the footage. This is us. Rode on a Black Hawk. That's in Virginia. Look at that plush landscape. You know, I was born here. I've lived almost my entire life here, except for when I lived in New York and Malaysia and Memphis and in Europe. But I've lived here most of my life. I'm going to die here. This is my place. This is Virginia. So we took a little helo ride around the Capitol on the Black Hawk. My buddy got us we went on a thing today. It was fun. He's my good buddy, and he got us a little ride on that. That was fun. This is the guy's, one of the pilot's helmets. Look at that. These are the Punishers. You got some Big Nine symbolism right there on the helmet. I was like, what's that? The Patronus Towers? He was like, nope, that's the Big Nine. Ever heard of it? And I was like, have I? There's a Virginia flag right there. Oh, here we go. Hold on. Here we go. Hold on.
Now, we also got some portable toilets right there, right next to the Ted Kaczynski hangar. That's where I personally live. That's my personal abode. See, as a MACV SOG TAC 1 warrior, full combat mission specialist, they give me a place to live right there in the Quonset hut. When I need to get around, the base, when I need to move a big shipment of opium, something like that, I make sure I take one of these old Gap Honda vehicles. Because if there's one thing that we don't want, is we don't want to project anything but strength in our vector. See, this thing's made of full American steel. We want to project, always, project strength. Search, destroy, divide, conquer, full spectrum dominance. You heard it here, folks.
That's a green light mullet 411. Take it sleazy. Mission is a go. There we go. Coming in for a landing. This is fun as fuck, dude. You guys ever been in a helo? Have you ever been in a helo? I'll take that chopper, put it down everywhere you like, young captain. I'll take that and put it down anywhere you like, young 6-foot pigs. Ha ha! That's Charlie's Point. That's pretty hairy. It's Charlie's. What does that mean, Charlie's Point? It's Charlie's Point. It's pretty hairy. Charlie don't surf. So that's it. That's it for that. You guys. It was a fun ass day, dude. That was fucking sick. I've never been in a helicopter before. Just your day-to-day grind going around. I'll take that chopper, put it anywhere you like, young captain. 6-foot pig. Aha! So anyway, that'll about do it for us here tonight at Bazed Analyzer. Hope you guys enjoyed the stream. Again, I've watched the Brutalist, so you don't have to. Shouts out to Micah right there for that $10 PayPal. Hey, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. If you want to support the operation, you can hit me up on PayPal, Cash App, Venmo anytime. You can also do super chats. And I will answer questions. You can also hit me up with an email if you want, madmaximalism with 2x's at gmail.com. Send me your writing. Send me your stuff. I'll help you out. It helps me if you help me out a little bit. That'll be good. But I will be, again, writing my... thank you, Gabriel Lopez. I will be having a nice therapeutic vacation, which I've really been waiting for. Man, it's been a heck of a year. I will say that I had a great accomplishment. Go to my Instagram page. You can check it out. But I had a great accomplishment this year with getting one of my lads through to the end here, graduating, and that's one of the highlights of my year. Great kid. Sometimes, I think we all just want somebody to give us some structure and somebody to look out for us and listen to us because, a lot of times, a lot of the best people just aren't listened to. They got everything against them. So I was really happy and blessed to form that kind of bond and to get a kid all the way through graduation. That was very, very, that's one of the highlights of my professional career. It is the highlight. It is the absolute pinnacle. And that's the kind of stuff they make movies out of. And so, God bless him. My boy out there, G, I'm going to say, because really, really proud of him. Really, really super fucking proud of him. It's great to see somebody in the world who has everything against them and who pushes through and succeeds. When you got somebody who's got everything against them, and they should have everything for them, but they've got everything against them, and they push through, and you see people, you see a young fellow becoming a man, having all of the discipline of a stoic person, a future dude who is going to have a life, he's going to have a family, he's going to have kids, and who has all the best qualities of somebody that's just likable and really didn't have to, go to school or anything. I mean, and he does, and you just, that kind of work ethic is very admirable, and from a person who just all they just do is give, So, yeah, we got to raise them boys up, and man, I'm so I mean, that really is. I ended my year on a big high note. It really. I don't want to get too personal here, but it really did take everything out of me at the end. It's kind of, I think that you all feel like this when you really grind, when you really, and that can be in a number of ways, when you really work hard with somebody, and they accomplish their thing, especially if it's something like, they accomplish the thing nobody can take away from them, like a graduation, they get a diploma. They can't take that away. And that takes a lot out of you. It takes a lot out of you physically, mentally, spiritually, in the best way. So anyway, so I'll be going on vacation, thankfully now, and we'll be getting some rejuvenation here. It'll be sweet. And I hope everybody out there, I hope you guys get some rest. A lot of times what we need, is we need some silence. We need, my friend Mikhail Technor Graphics was talking about this. I was talking to him yesterday. And we need some silence. You need some reaction time from all the noise in the world. Sometimes we just need to be alone with God. We need to have some silence to reflect and recollect. That's what artists do, of course. A lot of times that's what great people do. You can't just have action. You sometimes your action is being still. So that's going to be great. Hey, listen, I thank everybody out there for being with me here tonight. Please go back and watch my C.S. Lewis streams. You guys help me to by the way, go back and watch my stream on Jay's channel that we did about Mission Impossible. Check out some of our friends here. Check out DPH, Church of the Eternal Logos. Done some great streams lately. He's our good friend. And, help me get on some other streams here. I'd really like to do a stream with. I'd really like to do a stream with Isaac Weishaupt at Luminate Confirmed Watcher. I really want to do that. I've been a big fan of his work for a long time fan of Isaac. Love watching his streams, listening to his podcast for years and years. I think we could talk, and of course, some other people want to talk about literature and movies. I'll be on with John Here's coming up here in June when we get back sometime. And I'll enjoy the cabin in the woods, in the mountains, writing my screenplay Generation. And also I need to, working on my book. If you know a publisher out there, or you know someone who knows a publisher, please get me in contact with them. That would be, I'm trying to get these books published, and that's my main goal. It's my main goal. It's my life goal. Also check out the stream I did with Maddie, of course, on the hit piece article. Yeah, Tori says you'd be good on counterflow. Buck Johnson was mentioned in that article, and so we discussed that one. I hope everybody out there gets some good alone time and some time with your family. It's June. Let's get through this. Let's get through the fucking shit, you know. Johnny Vedmore needs to have you on for trivia. Yeah, I'd love to go back on Johnny Vedmore. Johnny Vedmore's awesome. He's great. It'd be great to get back with Burmis. Also, shouts out to H1tler and Speer and Ruckus and Boiler Room. I'm planning on getting to the Boiler Room meetup in the fall. I would love that, to be able to hang out with those guys in person. Hopefully, Joseph Arthur will be there too, you guys. You can check out my stream of Joseph Arthur on Bob Dylan in the members section. If you've got movies you want me to cover, books you want me to cover, please give me lists. Also, you can sponsor streams, of course. You can hit me up with $120 or whatever on PayPal. Give me a list of stuff, or you can just give me lists of books and movies you want me to cover. Leave them in the comments below. If you are lurking, I appreciate you. Thank you for lurking out there. Shouts out to Token Study out there, who was talking to me about Bret Easton Ellis. Go check out my Bret Easton Ellis analyses. I've done all of it. I think I've done all of his books. I've done a bunch of Cormac McCarthy, of course. I think I've done almost all of the, I haven't done 0K, but I've done almost all the Don DeLeo books. And yeah, so our friends out there are doing big things. We love that, of course. Shouts out to Jay and Rachel and Andrew, and made by Jim Bob. Go back to get a membership over at Jim Bob so you can watch our stream on Donnie Darko and Truman Show. And you guys, you know, hope y'all have a good summer. We're going to have a good summer 2025. PBR Street Gang, Almighty, out. We had a good day. Man, I'm tired from that helo ride. That was fucking crazy, bro. We're going in on a strafing run. Wait. So anyway, give this a like, share it. Let's end it up with some Rooks G to play us out. What does that mean, to play us out? To play us out, to end the show? All right, go. And that'll do us here for Inside Edition. And here's Sting and a cut off his new album. Take it away. What should we play from Rooks G? Let's try First Ascension. Came out 6 months ago. I think Rooks G was doing some big stuff today. I think he was DJing in person, which is pretty sick. Go to Rooks G. Tell him that I sent you. Shouts out to everybody out there. I love you guys. Again, you can support me anytime. I'll see y'all. That's about all I got. All right. Is it worth it? Yeah, it's worth it if you're strong enough. Rooks G with First Ascension. Peace, y'all. Love you. Oh.